From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Victims of the dam burst disaster in Brazil are being laid to rest in the town of Brumadinho. Friends and relatives carry coffins to burial sites at the local cemetery as grave diggers work to accommodate the sudden need for more graves. The death toll has risen to 84 people and almost 300 remain missing. According to rescuers working at the site, 48 people have been identified so far as work continues in the area.
Why would you build an administrative area under a dam? This was murder. They just buried my niece. My brother-in-law is missing. Innumerable colleagues. And then? How many orphans? How many sons? How many fathers? How many friends? How many neighbors? And they come saying that it was an accident?
And the Paraopeba River is running red-brown after the mining dam collapse spilled sludge into the water. The toxicity of the mineral-laced sludge is not yet known, but an indigenous community downstream complained that fish are dying.
Most of us here are very rural, riverside people, so we use the Paraopeba River to feed ourselves. It gives us fish, we use it to water our plants, and now we can't do this anymore. So many people have been affected by the dam breaking.
The president of the National Constituent Assembly in Venezuela has joined a demonstration to support the government of Nicolás Maduro. Diosdado Cabello, along with thousands of Maduro supporters, marched in the city of Barquisimeto to defend the Bolivarian revolution and Venezuela. Demonstrators say they want to protect the sovereignty and integrity of the country.
In the last 2 years, we have done 5 elections. There's no country in the world that can say that. There's not a single country that can say they are in regular touch with their people so they can make informed decisions. The last election on the 20th May 2018. Who do you vote for that time? Maduro. Who do you vote for that time? Maduro. We voted for Nicolás Maduro.
Meanwhile, Venezuela's Attorney General asked for a criminal investigation to be launched into the conduct of opposition leader Juan Guaidó. Tarek William Saab said Guaidó had put the country at risk by proclaiming himself as interim president. He's also proposing that Guaidó is barred from leaving the country and from selling his assets once a probe starts.
We have opened a preliminary investigation. We have come to the Supreme Court to request cautionary measures. Cautionary measures so that in the midst of the investigation we will carry out against the citizen Juan Guaidó, we are allowed to, in this case, 1. A travel ban to avoid his departure from the country, and 2. The ban to alienate and encumber property and real estate. 3. The freezing of accounts.
La prohibición de su salida al país.
The Attorney General's call came after the U.S. State Department officially announced that it has given Guaidó control over some assets of the Venezuelan government. The certification applies to certain property held in accounts by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York or any other U.S. insured banks. And President Nicolás Maduro has strongly rejected the United States sanction on a state-owned oil company, PDVSA, calling it illegal. He also described the Citgo company takeover as robbery.
John Bolton has announced the imposition of a series of measures of so-called sanctions, which are unilateral, illegal, and are against the UN Security Council. They are unilateral, illegal, immoral, and criminal. With these measures, they are trying to steal the Citgo company away from us, a company of all Venezuelans. Be alert, Venezuela. The United States has decided to take the path of robbery of the Citgo company from Venezuela. This is an illegal path. I have given the necessary instructions to the owner of the Citgo company to start the political and legal procedures before the U.S. and international courts to defend the property and wealth of Citgo.
The Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza said the United States has proven that it only wants to get its hands on Venezuela's oil. He added that it's what fueled the United States' support for the attempted coup. Our correspondent Alina Duarte explains the latest round of sanctions imposed by Washington.
The United States government's siege on Venezuela continues. This time, it is a new round of unilateral economic measures imposed on Venezuela's state oil company, PDVSA.
Sanctions against
According to U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton, those sanctions will block $7 billion in assets and $11 billion in petrol exports in the coming years. The U.S. hopes the move will put pressure on Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro.
That he's not the proper leader of the country at this time, and I've said these are valuable assets that we are protecting for the benefit of the Venezuelan people. We will continue to use all of our diplomatic and economic tools to support interim President Guaido, the National Assembly, and the Venezuelan people's efforts to restore their democracy.
However, the application of such measures by the U.S. are not new to Venezuela.
The U.S. has been against a socialist government in Venezuela from the day that Chavez came to office, has been trying through all different ways, including supporting a coup in 2002, to get rid of that government. And then it has been using economic sanctions to try to exacerbate internal problems that the government has made to make the economic situation as miserable.
Meanwhile, the Trump administration says it intends to send $20 million in humanitarian aid after request from opposition leader Juan Guaido. But a member of the Constituent Assembly, Pedro Sereno, says humanitarian help is another mechanism for interfering in Venezuela.
And Venezuela's oil minister has said his country is studying possible legal steps to take following the U.S. government's decision to place sanctions against the country's state-owned oil company, PDVSA.
We have all the will to maintain operations with the companies that have our supply contract, but at the same time, we want to protect the providers of supplies and material that have contracts with PDVSA and could be affected by not being able to supply those materials and supply to PDVSA. We are assessing whether any judicial and administrative actions that PDVSA must undertake would be suspended via force majeure. But at the same time, PDVSA can, under the contractual conditions, fulfill some of the commitments that we have in the North American market. We are evaluating all actions to limit as much as possible the impact on the world petroleum market.
Spain's Podemos party is expressing concern over the ongoing situation in Venezuela. The party's international secretary is warning that any military intervention in Venezuela's affairs could lead to civil war.
Mr. Guaido has said that military intervention is something that is being considered, and he has asked the armed forces many times to go against the government. So the plan for the next day is this one: a military coup, armed insurrection, or foreign intervention. If some of these options fail, there is a serious risk of civil war, a war that people will pay for with their blood. The same Venezuelan people you say you are defending. So I ask, is the Spanish government going to support a war or foreign intervention in Venezuela?
But Venezuela's foreign minister Jorge Arreaza has accused the Spanish prime minister of joining the coup against the Bolivarian government. Arreaza took to Twitter to respond to Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, who called President Nicolás Maduro a tyrant. He says Sanchez is following the mandate of U.S. President Donald Trump. 2 more social leaders have been killed in Colombia, bringing the number of leaders murdered this year to 16. In the state of Cauca, 44-year-old Dilio Corpus Gaito was shot several times as he was going to work. 52-year-old Jose Jair Orozco was killed at his home in the municipality of Cartago. Social movements are urging the government to take measures for these killings to stop. We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. There are only a few days left until the presidential elections in El Salvador. Our correspondent Ernesto Avalos tells us about how the country is preparing for the polls on February the 3rd.
Only 5 days till the presidential elections on February the 3rd. The Supreme Electoral Tribunal said it has distributed the electoral materials in 13 of the 14 departments of the country. San Salvador, the department of the capital, will be the last to receive these materials, in which the National Civil Police will help delivering. The National Civil Police will distribute the materials to around 25,000 electoral agents and administrative personnel. Moreover, they have informed people that the alcohol prohibition law will come into force a day before the elections and will be enforced on election day and a day after that.
Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel held a meeting with the Council of Ministers to evaluate recovery efforts following a tornado that hit capital Havana. Díaz-Canel stressed the importance of learning from the experiences of these weather events in order to improve disaster prevention. 4 people died as a result of Sunday's tornado and almost 200 were injured.
The experience was horrible. Once you watch the tornado from far away, lived in the trees, it's very painful to see from a distance, but to live it is frightening.
When I got to my house was closed off, and I saw the TV on the floor, along with a pile of furniture. The refrigerator was in the patio with all the food and everything outside. Even power lines were hanging down nearby. It's the most destruction that I ever seen in my life.
Members of the latest group of Central American migrants hoping to reach the United States have arrived in Mexico City. Over 1,000 migrants from Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua are being temporarily housed in a sports complex. The shelter provides food, medical attention, and clothing. The migrants are expected to rest a few days before continuing their journey. In Guatemala, landless campesinos are in a legal battle to recover the San Francisco Miramar farm of almost 5,000 square meters. More in this report.
These campesinos of Quetzaltenango say that they are victims of harassment and oppression. Their pleas come amid a legal dispute on the San Francisco Miramar farm, which they have occupied for 7 months.
Elements of a private security company has intimidated us here on the road, showing us their weapons and taking photographs.
Campesinos continue to allege that the landlord, Carlos Torreviarte, who claims to be the owner of the farm, uses rough elements of the police force to harass them. The history of this farm dates back to 1873 and 1885, when the president, Justo Rufino Barrios, gave land to the Germans. The land was then reclaimed during the Revolution of October 1944, according to an advisor to the campesinos.
Since 1954, when the revolution led by Castillo Armas occurred, the army took control of the land. But it turns out that in 1967, the Torreviarte family claimed ownership of the land.
Carlos Torreviarte has said that the campesinos are victims of a criminal network.
They are using land as an excuse to commit crimes and scams.
In the case of the San Francisco Miramar farm, which covers almost 50,000 square meters, the Constitutional Court could determine its rightful ownership.
A Brazilian mother has become famous due to her narration of football games to her deafly able son. Silvia Greco and her 12-year-old son gained recognition when the people of Sao Paulo saw her on TV. Greco narrates the game to her son, who is blind and autistic. Efforts are being made to make the game more accessible to differently able people, although there is still a way to go. In Argentina, a country which has produced some of the best names in sports, spaces used for sporting activities are now under threat. President Mauricio Macri has signed a decree allowing the government to sell off land used for sporting activities. Let's take a deeper look.
Sport isn't a priority for the current neoliberal political agenda in Argentina, and now A presidential decree will allow 700 hectares of land used for sporting activities to be sold to construction companies.
The government, with this decree, has transformed the role of the sporting secretary into that of an agency to privatise sports and make cuts. With that intention, they can sell off sports institutions where Argentine sporting prowess has developed, only doing so to construction companies.
The economic crisis is affecting neighbourhood sporting clubs, which don't receive economic assistance. They don't have the money for the activities that they put on, and in many cases, they haven't been able to help the thousands of young people that rely on them for these activities.
The situation that we're going through is worrying because we're being affected. The costs have gone up massively. Electricity, gas, water. We've had to leave our concerns about improving the building to one side and focus on being able to pay the bills.
Despite being historic institutions, hundreds of clubs are being forced to work hard to avoid closure, but the impact on their revenue is terminal. They won't be able to offer workshops or school support, and they'll have to close football academies. There's no investment in infrastructure and fewer scholarships that allow sportspeople to prepare themselves for international competitions.
This political system is injuring the club's economies. It's not just rates, but also daily impacts on clubs' existence. It's an attack on the country's sporting future, and it's Argentine state policy against local clubs. It makes you think, what do they want to change their clubs into? Companies? Us? We just want to be the local neighborhood clubs.
Sport in Argentina is going backwards. The role of clubs in bringing youth through the ranks is being lost, as well as the social role played for the most vulnerable sectors of society. In the face of all that, the government remains indifferent to the situation and only thinks about how to do good business.
The United Nations has declared 2019 the International Year of Indigenous Languages. Bolivia will host at least 2 international events to raise awareness about the increasingly disappearing languages. Our correspondent Freddy Morales from La Paz tells us more.
Bolivia is at the forefront of efforts to promote and preserve this core part of cultural identity that is in danger of extinction. The country will host at least 2 international events to advocate for the preservation and revitalization of indigenous languages. One will focus on highlighting indigenous people and their languages as a source of knowledge, while the other one will showcase how indigenous languages contribute to development. It is estimated that there are about 800 indigenous peoples in Latin America, and 37 of those communities can be found in Bolivia. In the Bolivian constitution, the 37 indigenous languages these indigenous people speak, as well as Spanish, are declared official languages.
Time for our second break. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back. The Houthi rebels in Yemen have released the first prisoner following the agreement they signed with the government last month. The International Committee of the Red Cross was in charge of overseeing this first prisoner swap. The organization confirmed that the prisoner is a Sikh Saudi soldier who has been transferred from Sana'a to Saudi's capital Riyadh. The 2 parties have agreed to exchange 15,000 detainees.
The release is purely based on health and humanitarian grounds. There are 2 ICRC staff in the plane. One of them is a health professional who will monitor the health of the released prisoner.
British lawmakers have voted against delaying the United Kingdom's exit from the European Union. MPs also voted in favor of a proposal calling on the British government to rule out leaving the EU without a deal, which will automatically happen on March 29. Even if a deal is not reached. Among the 7 amendments discussed, the Parliament also supported the proposal to remove the backstop in Ireland and replace it with, quote, alternative agreements.
The ayes to the right, 317.
Our correspondent in London, Pablo Navarrete, tells us more about this vote.
The British Parliament was once again dominated by the issue of Brexit this evening, with a number of votes taking place to effectively measure the strength of opinion on key issues surrounding the Brexit deal, which British Prime Minister Theresa May has failed to get past a majority at the British Parliament. As we all know, a couple of weeks ago, on the 15th of January, she suffered a quite catastrophic defeat on her deal with the European Union, losing by 230 votes, the biggest loss in modern British history. Under normal circumstances, Theresa May would have had to resign, and new general elections would have most probably been called. However, we find ourselves in unprecedented times, with Theresa May hanging on both the vote and also a motion of no confidence that was done the day after that loss. Today, a vote on removing the backstop, on effectively getting her deal with the European Union passed if the backstop with Northern Ireland to prevent a hard border was removed, which has caused so much controversy amongst the Brexiteer wing of her party, passed by 16 votes by 317 to 301. Now, immediately after, some members of the Scottish Nationalist Party declared that this meant that the Good Friday Agreement was in danger, and that is certainly something that has been heard on numerous occasions. The European Union have, for their part, said that they have finished negotiating effectively. On repeated occasions have said this. So Theresa May now, I imagine, would hope to go back to them with this new majority for this renegotiation of the backstop element of her deal, in the hope that she can finally take this to the British Parliament to get a majority. So this seems to be the latest in this Brexit saga, which has paralysed the country, meant that there is a general feeling of unease as the 29th March deadline approaches.
47 migrants are stranded on a boat off the coast of Italy, following the refusal by a number of European countries to allow the boat carrying the migrants dock. The migrants were rescued off the coast of Libya more than a week ago by a ship operated by German humanitarian group Sea-Watch. Thousands of refugees have lost their lives in the Mediterranean Sea while attempting to cross into Europe.
So I think it is important that we all are more sensitive to this. I think nobody has the right to decide on other people's lives. And in this case, yes, I agree there must be rules that have to be followed, but I also believe that it is obvious that some rules have to change.
The Rafah border crossing between Egypt and the Gaza Strip has temporarily reopened following a closure of more than 20 days. The Palestinian Authority withdrew employees from the Rafah crossing on 6th of January after accusing Hamas of arresting and abusing its staff. This left Hamas in control of Gaza's only entry point into Egypt, whose authorities have kept the crossing shut to oncoming Palestinians.
Sure, we have felt a big crisis due to the closure of the crossing for more than 20 days. This is a humanitarian crossing either from the Palestinian side or the Egyptian side or between Fatah and Hamas. So, I hope the officials and people responsible reach an agreement to completely solve this problem.
The Prime Minister of the Central African Republic led a march calling for a global arms embargo to be lifted ahead of a UN meeting later this week. The country, racked by ethnic and religious conflict since 2013, has been subject to the embargo for the past 5 years. It bans weapon supplies to the country unless approved by a sanctions committee. On Thursday, the UN Security Council will decide whether it will be renewed.
We're fed up with it. Regarding the embargo, France manipulates us a lot. We are in a sovereign country. Our army should defend us, but they didn't give our army the opportunity.
French President Emmanuel Macron called for respect for individual freedoms as he met with his Egyptian counterpart Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on Monday. Macron is on a 3-day visit to Egypt. He had vowed to raise human rights concerns with the former army chief, and he is hoping to boost ties between the two countries. And with this story, we come to the end of this news brief. This and many other stories you can find at our website at telsurenglish.net. And don't forget to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.